anybody who wants to, you know, join me up here, you know, Kurt, Brad, whoever, we're going to go over some of those questions. And Lindsay, if you could do the unmute of our lines. Once again, you are unmuted, but you have to self-unmute in order to talk. So we have these questions here. Would you prefer to see the distillery industry handle an increase in spent grains through centralized solution or patchwork of solutions, and why? What are the major barriers? What assistance do you need to overcome those barriers? You know, how important will new research be? How can distilleries and supporting organizations help make informed decisions about what solutions are effective, considering scale and costs? What subgroups can we create from this initial group to help tackle these things? And we've heard from a lot of folks today, but are there other folks that we need to bring to the table? So at this point, I'd like to just open it up to anybody within the group who would like to speak. I would ask that once we get done speaking, you know, unmute your line, speak, and then mute your line again to, you know, prevent that echo effect. So I'm opening it up to the floor right now.
Amanda, I'll kick it off for you. So it looks like we've gotten a response back from Bardstown Bourbon that they would actually prefer to see a centralized processing facility. So it does sound like that there is some interest that we have out there. And I guess my question to kind of spur this conversation along would be, is there an area within the state that anybody in attendance today think would be a good location for us to put into consideration for a centralized location?
I mean, I think, yeah, we can sort of map where the major producers are, and particularly where the craft people who may not have centralized processing or may be more prone to wanting those centralized processing facilities. But I mean, just sort of skimming where the existing distilleries are, I think near Bardstown or between Bardstown and Louisville, I think would be an area to explore. But I mean, there's researchers that do a lot of work on those distributed networks and trying to figure out the best place to locate them. So it wouldn't be that difficult of a project to sort of cut loose on to figure out where those things would go. But I would love to hear, yeah, more if there are others who would prefer that centralized approach or more of a distributed approach. I'd love to hear more on that question if other people want to chime in.
This is Kurt. I'll just throw something out for the group. So the folks that I talked to in Scotland, they historically have taken their stillage and piped it out into the Atlantic Ocean. But because of new environmental regulations, now they are trying to answer the same questions we're talking about today. And several distilleries have been quite successful in pooling resources and developing a centralized biogas plant. And this is true for many clusters.
Oh, you're
Amanda, something else that's come up in the question section is a comment regarding the limitations in distance for transport and the challenges and the economics associated with that as to having just one centralized location.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to realize that there are real challenges there. I think we have to balance that with the realization that it's either that or starting to look at watering and drying on each individual site. And I think pragmatically speaking, going back to what Kurt was saying, there is a model and experience and background for using that kind of model. But again, we're just wanting here to sit down and listen and try to understand what solution would be best and preferred by the people in this group.
kind of assistance would you guys like to see to overcome some of the barriers we talked about today?
One comment I have is, shipping water is always a challenge, because when we do even the product, with more water, obviously economics-wise, very difficult. In the biofuels project, shipping biomass, for example, is a challenge because it contains about 50% moisture in it. So I don't think it's going to be one universal answer for this. It depends on the plant's situation, and depends on the capacity of the plant. Smaller distilleries can pull up and basically to create the volume, a centralized location, but larger facilities can have a different solution. I don't think this is going to be a one answer question. It depends on the plan, depending on how much distance we need to ship. We're working with our industrial engineering group, for example, in terms of distributed wise, how much, what's going to be the overall cost. And also when we look at the overall greenhouse gas emissions reduction, shipping is going to lead to a lot of greenhouse gases as well. So that's something we need to look at that in the overall life cycle analysis. So I don't think this is going to be a one answer solution. This has to be depending on the plant and depending on how much volumes are available.
There's been a question raised by Mr. Ling. Are there recognized water content targets to achieve for the transport of solids, especially given the introduction of a centralized processing area for spent grains?
I mean, I'm gonna just jump in on that. I think one clear answer is as low as possible, but there are targets and established ranges in terms of what's common for wet cake, and I think, yeah, I know Jim's been doing a lot of work in this space for a bit. I think, yeah, but I don't know, maybe Kirk can jump in terms of common ranges for wet cake seen in the fuel ethanol industry.
Yeah, so typically what you see in the fuel industry, so generally, well, it depends on the company, but moisture content's 50 to 70% for the wet cake. And then typically the transportation distances are going to be less than 50 miles. And those are either going to be by a farmer's truck or by a semi, which is owned by the plant. So it really depends on the business model for that company. Some companies will have the farmers come pick up the wet cake, and they'll just have a scale there and they'll pay on the way out. Or then some companies, the larger ones, will have their own fleet of semis for shipping. And that's for the wet cake.
Amanda, can you hear me? This is Jack Gibbons.
Yes, I can hear you.
On the centralized location, when in our presentation we talked about Marion County, and we understand that may not be probably not the most centralized location, but we have looked at other locations. Marion County, we obviously need to look in Bardstown in that area to get more centralized. Probably, regardless of where we build, we understand that it's probably going to have to be a couple of different locations, and we are preparing ourselves to already build a second location. So with the distances that were just discussed, we have already and are dealing with those issues as we speak. So, so we do understand that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, what other feedback do we have?
This is Tara Friel. I'm representing EnviroFlight today. As Brad mentioned, we're currently feeding the dried distillers grains, and we'd definitely be interested in looking into how we could possibly use the wet stillage. I was curious what kind of applications are currently being explored for wet stillage, if any.
Can anyone speak to that? Apparently very good question.
So just to be specific, the question was what applications are being developed for wet stillage, for whole stillage? Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're using the dried distillers grains right now, and I do some of the diet formulation, and we could actually potentially look into using some of the wet stillage, depending on the nutrient profile. So I was just curious, thinking about transportation and stuff, we would try to use some of the local distilleries if we were able to use the wet stillage product.
Right. And that's a really good question. You know, over the years, historically, there's been a lot of work done trying to understand, you know, what are the nutrient contents and what are the digestibilities. Most of that work, well, to be honest, the original work was done in pigs, and then it kind of transitioned into cows and beef cattle. It's actually been several years since there's been a significant quantity of research done on feeding stillage directly. Most of the research is done on either wet cake or dry grains. But there has been an extensive body of work done. It's just been quite some time. And the thing that I would caution you, though, is, you know, every distillery is going to have a different mash bill, and so that's going to impact the specificity of the nutrient content. And I know that's important for your application.
Definitely, yes, thank you.
Sounds like a really interesting study to do, though, because I know you all have done quite a lot of work over the last several years.
Some corn milling industries, they are providing wet feed to the local markets. So again, the challenge is the preserving. How do you preserve the feed, and at the customer side as well as at the production side? But there is some wet corn milling industries in Iowa. They have wet feed. They develop wet feed markets, and they supply as a wet cake to the customers.
So if I can jump in and sort of take a slightly different perspective on this, I actually think the variability in feedstock is actually an advantage of our community, because if you look at developing insect feed for fuel ethanol, you're really just looking largely at corn. You've got one product going out, or variations on that theme. If we go in and we invest money in studying this insect feed problem, and it turns out it works really well for high rye mash bills, we know where we can put those facilities and take a little of that distiller's grain off the market and divert that towards that end use, whereas we may have heavily weeded mash bills going towards a different approach, or things that are low in both wheat and rye going in a different strategy altogether. So I actually think as far as technology development and feed development and things like that, our diversity in the distilling community for beverage is actually an advantage for us making good use of multiple technologies.
For sure, agreed. I think there's definitely a lot to explore within this industry. So we're excited about it.
Amanda, some of the feedback we've gotten recently, I guess in an answer to one of the major barriers is the problem with dewatering is what to do with the permeate. And, you know, they can't put it down the drain, therefore it requires additional processing. So that would be a barrier to check into on what solutions we can come up with. Some of the other comments we've received recently is Kentucky is the 8th largest cattle state. It seems we just need more support and education. Sorry, hold on a second. More support and education. Well, they're all asking questions now. Hold on a second. On how to access and utilize stillage and stillage byproducts effectively. Most barriers for farmers are the capital costs of the troughs and hauling ability. So that's something else that's been raised. If it's fed to the cattle directly or blended in a TMR with fiber to feed livestock as an option or alternative that we might want to consider. Let's see. Comment by Mr. Jacob Covington. We have recently spoken with a fertilizer producer about the use of our whole stillage or wet cake as a raw material for fertilizer production. And is there anyone with experience with this and the viability of this use is a question that was just raised as well. All right, moving on from that one. With the traveling distance increase for a centralized solution, do we know if there would be any additional DOT requirement impact?
I guess we could also look into that one.
Oh, it looks like we've gotten a response that a Russell Barnett at the University of Louisville was looking to begin a study on stillage as fertilizer, and he could be contacted at his email address through the university. So we can get that out to folks after the webinar.
Okay. Anything else, Carrie?
Not that I'm seeing at this time. We've got some good feedback and discussion coming in, but I think it's mostly follow-up that we can send out to the group after the webinar.
Okay, good deal.
Yeah. So I have a sort of a question to the audience. Are there technical content pieces that you'd love to hear more about as Kurt and myself start looking at planning these upcoming meetings that are sort of related to this topic? I would really love to hear feedback on, technologies or things either we only heard a little about today or we didn't hear at all about today. Really, I'm kind of just sort of pulling the audience in terms of interest areas. You're welcome to unmute or just sort of respond by text.
We are a quiet group today.
From Mr. Jim Ling, it's not a question, but he is offering to serve as a resource for dewatering and the under 35K solutions, and then he's provided his contact information. Mr. Roger Henley has also expressed interest in using the biomass as fuel source for boilers, and he's wondering if anyone has done much work in that area.
I think there's a couple people who might be in the attendees list. I don't know if they're able to talk or not, but there were people with, I was talking earlier with SOMAX and JCS who are looking at doing that kind of work in terms of biomass, if we're talking about actually just sort of burning the stillage and things like that. And then there's also people looking at the biogas space, but maybe some of those people can chime in.
Amanda, if you'd like, I can unmute participants in the audience.
Yes, we should. Yeah.
All right, they are unmuted on our end. They will have to click their own unmute buttons for us to hear them, though.
So, hi, this is Jeremy.
Yes.
Okay, I just got unmuted. I'm good to go, I think. So I talked with Brad last week about our technology, and it kind of falls in line with what the other presenters talking about with hydrolysis, but taking it a step further and making a kind of a biocarbon from the distiller's grains. What we're able to do is to take the distiller's grains that we dry to the BTU value or energy value in the mid to low 20s megajoules per kilogram and increase that heating value to the high 20s. And we have a material that is similar to biocoal, easily fired or gasified for energy. And it's a source of low carbon energy. And it has advantages to it as well. It's able to be dewatered very easily. So it has lower energy usage compared to just drying distiller's grains. And then it gives a higher heating value final product.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Hey, Amanda, this is Sam Kessler from U of L on the Provost Sustainability Council.
Yes.
A few years ago, we were looking at doing a project to support anaerobic digestion of stillage in Louisville. And if I remember from the files, there was a kind of carbon analysis done looking at that versus biomass gasification and making like the briquettes that you all have mentioned. And I think one thing from the environmental side that we might need to take a deeper look at is the carbon cycle differences when you compare biomass gasification versus anaerobic digestion, and which one might have less emissions and less energy costs too. That might be something to think about.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sam.
It looks like Jeremy might have gotten cut off, but he said he'd be happy to provide additional information for anyone that's interested in the hydrothermal carbonization and creating a solid fuel from the distiller's grains. And then a question from Mr. Roger Henley. What is the ash content of the biochar?
Anybody know that one?
Mr. Sean White, to Brad's question about what we are interested in hearing more about, the response was always interested in hearing about newer technology around processing stillage on site, or if these new technologies offer the ability for a centralized solution is good too.
Other questions, comments about our guiding comments here? Are there people that we should have brought to the table today? Are there subgroups that we need to create for specific issues? It sounds like, yeah, there's definitely agricultural area here, you know, in that area, and then there's, you know, some of the other things that we're talking about today too. So what are your thoughts on that?
This is Kurt. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to maybe bring some of the technology providers into the conversation, maybe? Because whether it's gasification or hydrothermal or centrifugation or filtration or even utilities, maybe some of the transportation companies, maybe we need to bring some of these people into the conversation as well.
Excellent thought. Excellent suggestion. As there's questions we can't answer, right?
Yeah. One thing I'll also comment is I think maybe as we move forward in the next time we get together, we may try to figure out a better way to interacting in small groups, maybe to have a little better conversation to try to push things together. So maybe breakout rooms in a Zoom meeting or something like that, where we can get together and in small groups of 5 or 10 people and have a conversation and then come back to the big group. But good, because I think, yeah, conversation in a room of 80 can be a little awkward sometimes. So
it is. This is not necessarily the greatest platform, and you know, we were sort of use this one just because of timing and everything. But I think in our conversations we had talked about rooms and things like that, where we'd have breakout sessions where it's a little bit more conducive to these types of conversations. So, but
yeah, I'll make sure that's a priority for our follow-up meeting that's coming up in March.
unmute myself. Do we have any other comments? Because we are going to send these questions out via you know, a follow-up survey, along with probably some others. I think we'll get this group together again and you know, come up with some follow-up questions from all what we've heard today. But anything else that you guys would like to share?
Amanda, one last suggestion that we received from Mr. Trevor Terry Perhaps a publicly available contact list organized by research, a focus group, or industry, supplier, vendor, etc., would be useful for those in attendance and those in the association.
So, good idea. All right. Anything else, folks? All right. Well, we thank you all for joining us today. Like I said, we will be sending out a follow-up survey. We've got a couple events coming up in March and May, and I think we have the possibility of doing some other smaller events. Like I said, I know we have our Sustainable Spirits events that we do every year. So, you know, there's ways that we can carry this through, and hopefully live and in person, you know, we can skip the echoes, technology. You'll have traditional technology problems that we're all used to instead of the new ones. These feel odd and weird at this point still. So everything that we have to be available online. We'll try to get presentations and share those as well. Contact some of this information that we have in our Q&A panel, we can share out as well. Once again, we'll have that survey that we developed that will have questions, not only the questions we asked today, but, you know, what are your preferences for follow-up events, you know, very targeted education groups that we may want to work with, because like I said, today's just an open salvo to, you know, what we really need to do, the hard work that needs to be done to figure out our paths forward here. So with that, I want to thank our speakers again. I would like to thank Lindsay Hirsch with the Division of Compliance Assistance for running GoToWebinar today. Carrie Johnson, Paulette Akers, Denise Profit, all within EEC who helped make this run today. So we very much appreciate that. So with that being said, everybody have a fantastic holiday season. Please stay safe. And we hope to see you in the next new year. So can't believe it's end of 2020. Happy it's end of 2020, but you know, hopefully we're looking at 2021. So, all right, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.